We're going to start right here at the Oscar Wilde Monument. We'll talk about Oscar Wilde and his family for the first 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to move on through the park, and there's a series of busts and statues. We'll talk about the characters there are on the statues. We'll talk about others that are associated with Merrion Square. We'll talk about some of the famous former residents of Merrion Square, and we'll also tell you a few stories as well. So get excited. Is everybody excited?
Yes, absolutely.
I like this one. This guy's got a great attitude. I love it. So, Oscar Wilde, you can see his statue right here, and what's he looking at? His childhood home right across the road here. The bus is in the way. Number 1, Merrion Square. The very first house ever built on Merrion Square. Merrion Square dates back to 1762. So number 1. Now, he wasn't born here. He was born right around the corner at number 21 Westland Road in 1854. In 1855, when he was a year old, he came to live in this house with his parents. Now, his parents were Anglo-Irish nationalists. Now, I know all you Irish guys would understand what I mean when I say Anglo-Irish. For you foreign people from Spain and all that, do you guys know what Anglo-Irish means?
No, they were from England and they came here.
The background would have been British. Might just be English.
They had the money, the land.
Would have been British, right? But the Wilde family would have been way back. Now, his father was Sir William Wilde. And Sir William Wilde was the leading eye and ear surgeon of his day, having been educated at the world famous College of Surgeons right there in St. Stephen's Green. Now, he was probably the height of his career was around the time of the Irish famine from 1845 to 1852. That was the height of his career, and obviously at that time people were very, very poor, and he was very much a philanthropist. Now, he would have looked after the elites here of the Georgian Squares around Dublin. He would have looked after your lawyers, your doctors, your politicians, his guards, eye surgeon and ear surgeon. But he also, as I said, was a philanthropist and used to perform free surgery for the poor people of Dublin and maybe even other parts of Ireland as well. So a very noble guy. He also wrote books on medicine. He wrote books on archaeology and also on Irish folklore. And he set up what is the Eye and Ear Hospital that you know today. When he set that up, he established that hospital, still going strong today. And he was knighted in 1864 for his contribution to medicine. Now, his mother, Oscar's mother, was the real influence on his life because she was also a writer. She was a short story writer, and she wrote for the leading publication of the day known as The Nation. And she went by the pen name Speranza, which means hope.
Esperanza.
A Spanish guy telling us all about Italy.
It's a Spanish word. Esperanza is a Spanish word.
Is it as well? As well as Italy is. In Italian it means hope as well,
yeah, it's
right?
Spanish as well.
And Spanish as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Thanks for that.
Well, now
Which
we
is
have
that?
teaching you.
That?
We are teaching you something.
I gotta write it down. Hold on, let me write it down. Okay. So she wrote for the leading newspaper site called The Nation. For the known as The Nation. Now she used to run these salons or gatherings, if you like, in this house right here, where the who's who of Dublin society would come by and listen to the stories of Lady Jane Wilde. Now, this woman was a woman of immense character, a huge, great conversational skills, very, very witty, and while telling stories, she was prone to exaggeration. But she always maintained, never let facts get in the way of a good story. Now, maybe she penned that, I'm not sure. But anyway, Oscar was allowed to sit in on these social gatherings in this house and so forth and listen to the stories of his mother, who was basically telling stories on Irish folklore and what have you. And now Oscar, he left this house when he was 13 years old to attend the leading boarding school of the day, which was called Royal Portoforo Boarding School in Enniskillen, County Fermanagh in the north of Ireland. Probably the most exclusive boarding school in Ireland at that time because they were a very wealthy family. Now, even at this young age of 13 years old, intellectually he was way ahead of the rest of his classmates. And when he was about 16, 17, he finishes first in his class and he wins a scholarship to Trinity College. Now at Trinity, he only spends 2 years there because then he wins a further scholarship, this time to Oxford. Now, whilst at Oxford, he befriended the sons of very much socialite families from London. And because of this, he used to get invited to all, with the social circles and social clubs and what have you, among the elites in London. And what did he do when he got there? He would gather everybody around. Now this is him as a student at Oxford. He hasn't written a book, a play, or a poem at this stage, and he's already famous around the streets of London simply because he would gather everybody around these clubs and start telling them stories in Irish folklore. And he was a huge hit. Now, before he even got there, these clubs would have been half full, maybe even less than that. Word got around the streets of London about this guy, Oscar Wilde, and his stories, and suddenly these places are packed, standing room only. Even the royal family at the time said, who is this Oscar Wilde that we have not met yet? So he's a huge success, as I say, just as in the early days. Now I'm going to skip some years of his life, otherwise we'll be here all day. Now, he eventually marries this lady, probably about 10, 15 years after he finishes school in Oxford. And her name is Lady Constance Lloyd. And she was the daughter of a Queen's Counsel. And believe it or not, she grew up right up the street here in Ely Place. You don't even have to leave the street. Go straight through the next traffic lights. That's Ely Place. And that's where she grew up. And they didn't really know each other here in Ireland. They met in England. They met in London. Now, they had 2 children, 2 boys. This is very significant for the rest of the story later on. They had 2 boys. And they were happily married for probably 5 or 6 years or so. And then Oscar, he grew bored of married life and he entered into a homosexual relationship with a man by the name of Boise, Lord Alfred Douglas. Now, he was the son of the Marquis of Queensberry. Did you ever hear of the rules to boxing?
Yeah.
They're called the Queensberry rules. So, this was this man, he was a Scotsman, Lord John Douglas, a brute of a man, and he hated the fact that his son was a homosexual, and he hated even more that his son was dating Oscar Wilde. So, he would go along to all the clubs where Oscar, with the elite clubs that Oscar was so popular in, and shout aloud that Oscar Wilde was a man that performed indecent acts. And he'd go around to the theatre district where his plays were being performed, the importance of being earnest, the Lady Windermere's fan, and so forth, and he'd shout aloud, Oscar Wilde is a sodomizer and what have you. Give out his card if anybody would listen. Now with this, Oscar's lover, who hated his father with a passion, told Oscar, you must sue my father, you must sue him for libel. Now with this, all of Oscar's friends said, do not go there. This is a very powerful man. Do not sue this man. But despite that, he didn't listen to his friends, he listened to his lover, and he takes this man to court for libel. Big mistake. So, the man representing the Marquis of Queensberry was none other than a man by the name of Edward Carson. And Edward Carson grew up at number 1 Harcourt Street, right near St. Stephen's Green, the last house before St. Stephen's Green. And he also attended Trinity College at the same time as Oscar Wilde. So they knew each other pretty well. And this was the cream of the crop lawyers at this time, defence lawyers, this guy Edward Carson. And Oscar and his lover made a big mistake because not only were they involved sexually with each other, but they also were engaged in the homosexual underground of London at the time. You know, remember, this was completely illegal. Homosexuality was not legal at this time, and for many years later, obviously, as well. And so they were also involved with rent boys and stable boys. And the bigger mistake that Oscar Wilde made was, after each encounter with these stable boys and rent boys, he would give them all a signed cigarette case. A signed cigarette case for them, right? So, what does this guy Edward Carson do during this trial against the Marquis of Queensberry for libel? He marches in all these rent boys and stable boys. And they all come out with their cigarette cases signed by Oscar Wilde. You know, so this case is thrown out. Obviously the Marquis of Queensberry is found innocent, and now a new case is formed against Oscar Wilde for indecent acts. This is 1885, and he's found guilty, and he goes to prison. Now, prisons at this time in 1895 were horrific. It was like your hard labour, water and sleeping on a rock bed or whatever, you know. So it was really horrific conditions because Oscar Wilde was used to the luxury of life his whole life, living in a beautiful home right here at number 1 Merrion Square, but also he had the most beautiful furnished homes in London with the best of blue china and what have you. So he wasn't used to any kind of hardship. So this, for the time he went to prison, for the time he got out of prison, he was a sick man, he was not well. And when he got out of prison, this is in 1897, he moves almost immediately to Paris in France, never to return to either Ireland or Britain again, and he dies in the year 1900, destitute at the age of 46, not a penny to his name. Now what's really, really sad is that Oscar Wilde was, like his father, very much a very kind-hearted, generous person, and he would give a lot of financial gifts to a lot of his friends in their time of need and what have you. And he spent way beyond his means. This guy would have made an absolute fortune. He spent way beyond his means. So when he went to prison, he had no money at all. All of his books would have been thrown out of the bookstores. All of his plays shut down in the West End Theatre District of London. So he had no form of income. And now he's buried in Père Lachaise, is that how you say it? It's in Paris, and it is the largest cemetery in all of France. I think 3 million people are buried there. And the most visited grave in the whole graveyard is Oscar Wilde. Number 2 is
Jim Morrison.
Jim Morrison is number 2. Oscar Wilde is perfect for knowing that, right? So yeah,
I've seen the Jim Morrison.
Oscar Wilde's number 1, and Jim Morrison's number 2. Which goes to say how brilliant the guy was and so forth. But it's very, very sad because in today's circumstances, that was how we celebrated being a homosexual, not frowned upon, you know. And now a lot of people at this time would have blamed Oscar Wilde himself for being too flamboyant and too outspoken about it or so forth, or not hiding the fact that he's a homosexual. Now, I remember I mentioned to you earlier, I wanted to show you this statue right here. This statue was unveiled by a man by the name of Merrion Holland. Who was Merrion Holland? Merrion Holland was Oscar Wilde's grandson. So how come his name is Holland? Because they had 2 sons. Because of the scandal with Oscar Wilde, his wife changed the son's last name from Wilde to her mother's maiden name, Holland, to avoid any scandal with the boys and so forth. So, Merrion Holland in 1987, the grandson of Oscar Wilde, unveiled the statue. The statue was, the sculptor was Danny Osborne, a Scottish sculptor. The big rock right there, I think it's 20 or 40 tons or something, was sourced from the Wicklow Mountains. If you look at his clothing, he's wearing his Trinity College tie, and all of his clothing is sourced from all over the world, 3 different continents. And this illuminates at night time. So if you're walking by here and it's dark outside, you'll see this, it's all lit up. And what a great location overlooking his childhood home. Now, this is his wife, Constance Lloyd, and if you look right here on the pillars, you'll see these quotes, because Oscar Wilde is famous for his quotes. He had hundreds of quotes. My favourite one is, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." But probably his most famous quote is, he's going on a speaking engagement to the United States, and he's stopped at customs and he's asked, "Do you have anything to declare?" He says, "I got nothing to declare but my genius." He's very vain, he was. And this statue, a little bust right here, is Dionysus, the Greek god of theatre and wine, of which Oscar was very fond of. Now, supposedly, these quotes of his quotes, or these writings of his quotes, or these was written by none other than one of Ireland's greatest ever poets, Seamus Heaney, from near where Niall is from, Derry. He's originally from Derry. So Seamus Heaney, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2005, and also supposedly Michael D. Higgins, our current president, because he's a scholar in the Irish and English language. So their quotes are written in the handwriting of Michael D. Higgins and also Seamus Heaney. Any questions about Oscar? So I will also mention this, that as I said before, Oscar was a very wealthy man, but he spent beyond his means. The same applied to his family, to his parents. They used to constantly have parties here and so forth. And when the father died, I think he died in 1876, he died bankrupt. And the mother had to sell this house, and she moved to London. And she moved in with her older son, Oscar's older brother, Willie Wilde, who happened to be a broke journalist. And she died while Oscar was in prison. And he didn't even have enough money to pay for her headstone. Eventually, he did get the money to pay for her headstone and so forth. So, everybody's heard of the story, rags to riches. Well, theirs was the complete opposite, riches to rags. And that's the story of Oscar Wilde and his family. We're going to move on to the next book, folks. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. And we'll go from there. Right? We're getting out of the sun. This is great.
Recording, is it?
Yeah, that's it, like that. Yeah.
Presidente de Chile, me parece.
Okay, folks. We'll let these people pass. So, folks, has anybody ever heard of this guy?
Yeah.
Bernardo O'Higgins.
Yeah.
This young lady has as well. Very good. Excellent. So, Bernardo O'Higgins is considered to be the founding father of Chile. We say Chile, Americans say Chile. But anyway, Chile. We're going to say Chile because we're Irish, right? So he's the founding father. So he won independence for Chile in the Chilean War of Independence against Spain. If you were to ask any person from Chile, who's the most famous person in the history of Chile, it's this guy right here, Bernardo O'Higgins. But before we can talk about him, we've got to talk about his father. His father was Ambrose O'Higgins, who grew up on a farm in County Sligo, on the west coast of Ireland. His parents were tenant farmers. And he worked the farm himself, Ambrose, until he was 30 years old. And when he reached 30 years old, he decided, I'm getting out of this farming game. And he decided he's going to join the Spanish army. And he moves to Cadiz in Spain, joins the Spanish army, but also at the same time, he studies engineering in a university in Cadiz. And when he finishes his studies, he practices engineering in Cadiz and so forth. He becomes a very, very prolific engineer, really, really good engineer, and he relocates to Chile. Whilst in Chile, he founded and built 8 cities. He built bridges, roads, he even built a series of posts through the Andes Mountains where mail could be delivered from the neighbouring countries of Peru and Argentina and so forth throughout 12 months of the year. Before he did that, it was too cold during the winter months to be able to deliver mail. So he built a series of posts. Now, when Ambrose was 52 years old, he has a relationship with an 18-year-old Chilean girl. And the result was the illegitimate child, Bernardo. Now, of course, Ambrose had to skip town because obviously her parents weren't too happy with Ambrose, you know, the age difference. So he lived with his mother and his mother's family, and he didn't have the name O'Higgins. Whatever his mother's last name, it's a long Spanish name, I can't pronounce it. But anyway, so in all their lifetime, Ambrose and Bernardo never even met each other, not even once. But Ambrose amassed a huge fortune, and he paid for Bernardo's education. He was educated in Spain and in London, so he got a first-class education. Now, in the year 1800, Ambrose dies, and he leaves his whole entire fortune to his only child, Bernardo. And on that day, that Bernardo gets all this huge land and property and everything else, he changes his name to O'Higgins. And now, if you look at the main thoroughfare in Argentina, in Chile, in Santiago, the main, like ours is O'Connell Street, the main thoroughfare in Santiago is the Avenue of Bernardo O'Higgins, whatever way you say that in Spanish. Whatever she said, so there you go. And so there's also something like 1,000 streets named after him, 200 schools named after him, and even a football team, FC O'Higgins. Now, in 1995, the Republic of Chile gave this statue because of Republic of Chile in 1995 gave the statue to the people of Ireland for his Irish connections. So that's the story of Bernardo O'Higgins. Irishman. His father's Irishman. So there you go. Any questions about Bernardo?
Yes.
Yes.
You have
the spoil
same statue in the Harbour.
Oh, that's of William Brown. Admiral
no.
William Brown, not him.
Ah,
Admiral William
as
Brown.
well from Chile.
No, he's from Argentina.
Ah, Argentina, yes.
He was the commander of the fleet. Of the
Oh,
Argentine
yes.
Navy. Another Irishman. That's a great story as well. I can tell that story too. Yeah. All right, folks. Has anybody ever heard this guy right here? Henry Grattan. Come on, Irish folks. You gotta have heard of Henry Grattan. Any Irish person never heard of him? Good man, Fenbar. So, Henry Grattan. Henry Grattan was one of the leading figures of the old-time Irish politicians. He's probably the first big name in Irish politics. And he was this great orator, not just a politician, but he was a great orator, a great public speaker. In fact, he was full of energy and enthusiasm, and he was like the Energizer Bunny, if you like. He was full of enthusiasm. So he was the Irish representative, the top Irish politician in the old Irish Parliament. Do you know where that building is? Opposite Trinity College, which is now the Bank of Ireland.
Oh, yes.
That's the old Irish Parliament with the old Irish House of Lords and the old Irish House of Commons. Was the seat of the government and so forth. And as I say, he was the lead figure. Now, his goal obviously was freedom for Ireland, independence for Ireland, legislative freedom for Ireland and so forth. And also, more importantly, economic rights for the poor Irish people of the day. Because at this time, most Irish people were involved in agriculture. Probably about 95% of the whole population was involved in some kind of job in agriculture. And they were mostly very, very poor, working on lands that used to belong to their ancestors, but now working for British landlords. And they were treated very badly. They got thrown off their land for the slightest thing, things with their rental time and all that kind of stuff. So he tried to ease restrictions as regards that and so forth. And as I say, he fought for independence. Now, unfortunately, he did get some stuff done legislatively, but he didn't get most of his goals. He didn't reach it. But he was beloved by the Irish people because he tried so hard to get to change, things for the good of the Irish people. And he was so popular that the Irish people didn't call it the Irish Parliament. They called it Grattan's Parliament. That's how popular he was. Now, unfortunately, the Act of Union in the year 1800, it was implemented in 1801, was where all Irish affairs were now to be conducted in Westminster. So all the Irish politicians had to leave Ireland and go to Westminster, including poor old Henry Grattan. And he continued working for Irish legislative freedom, economic rights for the poor people, freedom for Ireland and so forth, right up until his death in 1820, and he's buried in Westminster. Unfortunately, his wishes were to be buried back here, but maybe logistics back then, it didn't happen and so forth. But as I say, one of the great Irish politicians. Now I'm going to talk about another man that continued on from where he left off a little later. Now, if you go to, there's a little island outside of Trinity College and then across the way from the old Irish Parliament, and you see a massive big statue of Henry Grattan. There's also a bridge over the River Liffey named the Henry Grattan Bridge. Where is it? From Parliament Street to Pickett Street. That bridge is the Henry Grattan Bridge. Grattan Bridge, right? There's a street up here called Grattan Street, and there used to be a pub called Henry Grattan. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe now you can buy another one called the Henry Grattan. Any questions about Henry Grattan? Okay, we'll move on, folks. You know what's amazing?
And cheaper as well.
Yeah,
Just Russell, yes, I know
just
this
guaranteed
one.
nice weather.
Yes.
That was your grandfather.
I know you guys haven't heard of this fella,
Yes, yes.
which is quite amazing how nobody's ever heard this guy, but there's a reason for it. And this is George Russell. He went by the name A.E. And just to give you his CV, if you like, if you're American, they call it resume. But he was a critic. He was a writer. He was a poet. He was an artist. He was a playwright. He was a newspaper owner that owned two newspapers, the Irish Statesman and the Irish Homestead. He founded the Irish literary movement and the young Irish literary movement with his best friend William Butler Yeats. And he was just a great guy. He used to help all the young Irish writers and so forth. Now remember I talked to you a little earlier about Oscar Wilde's mother having the salons and gatherings in her house on Saturday evenings? Well, he used to have gatherings in his house on Sunday evenings. He lived on Rathgar Avenue, Rathgar, and the who's who of Irish literature would come by to A.E.'s house. He went by the name A.E., George Russell's house, and they'll talk about the next book that they're writing or the one they just published and so forth. Now, he was great with the young Irish writers because at that time, James Joyce and Patrick Kavanagh and young Irish writers at the time would attend these meetings in his house and so forth. And because he owned two newspapers, he published the very first writings of Patrick Kavanagh, of James Joyce and all these other great Irish writers. And they were indebted to this fellow. Now, the reason why you don't know this guy's name, in my opinion, and a lot of other people agree with me, is because he signed all of his work A.E. Now, how did this come about, A.E.? Well, he signed all of his work A.E.I.O.U. in his early days. It's some Greek god or something like that, whatever. And one time during his early work, the printer couldn't make out the other letters, and they could only make out A.E. So he just printed it as written by A.E., right? And from that day on, everybody called him A.E. Even his best friend William Butler Yeats called him A.E. No one ever called him George Russell again, everybody called him A.E. Now I reckon if he signed everything George Russell, he'd be a household name today. Not as big as Oscar Wilde or William Butler Yeats or George Bernard Shaw or whatever, but he still would have been big enough. The Abbey Theatre was founded in 1904. He helped found it with Lady Gregory and William Butler Yeats, and the first play ever performed was his play called Deirdre. He was an absolutely amazing artist. His art can still be found today in the top galleries of Dublin and so forth, and other parts of Ireland. And he's not so celebrated here in Dublin that much, but he is celebrated in another place, because he was born in a place called Lurgan in County Armagh, and he was 11 years old when he came to Dublin because his father got a job here. And they have a week-long festival, the A.E. George Russell Festival, in April every year in the town of Lurgan, County Armagh. So it's a big festival. I want to go to one day. So he was a great guy. He also set up the United Arts Centre, which still goes strong on Fitzwilliam Street, among a few other people, but he was one of the founder members of that as well. But he was a great guy. Now, as I say, he went by the name A.E. So Joyce was indebted to this guy big time because he printed his first works and so forth. So now the story is that Joyce is leaving the house one day and he's waving at A.E. at the window, at the door, or whatever, waving goodbye to him, and he shouts back at him. He says, A.E.I.O.U. Not to be foul or anything, because he helped so much. I.O.U. You know.
I'm sitting from where he came.
I'm sure if you're Irish, you've all heard of Michael Collins. If you're not Irish, have you ever heard of Michael Collins?
Yeah.
Well, if you were to ask an Irish person, who's the most famous person in Irish history, they would probably tell you it's one of two people, either Michael Collins or maybe Daniel O'Connell. And maybe if you go further back, Brian Boru. But probably, one of the most famous people in Irish history. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story, the story about Michael Collins. So he was born in 1890, and he was the youngest of 8 children. He was born in a very remote part of West Cork, probably a couple of miles outside a town called Clonakilty. And he was the youngest of 8 children. His father was 70 years old when he was born. He had a much younger wife though. And his father was a poor farmer. And when his father was dying, and Michael was 7 years old, so father would be 77. He calls Michael over to his bedside. He says, Michael, you're going to go down in history as one of Ireland's greatest ever men. And his premonition obviously came true. Now, when he was 16 years old, Michael Collins, when he was 16 years old, he left Ireland to go to live with one of his sisters in London. And whilst there, he joined the Post Office Savings Bank in London. He also, while he was there, he joined the Irish Republican Brotherhood. He also joined the GAA of London as well. He met, what's his name? Sam Maguire there, who happened to be another Cork man.
Yeah,
The guy left the trophy, Sam Maguire. Yeah, and anyway, whilst at the, he's known as one of these great military leaders, but he wasn't just a great military leader, he was a great organiser. And he was asked at one time, how did he get all these great organisation skills, or how come he's so organised? And and what he said was, from working in the Post Office Savings Bank in London. Because remember, back then, no computers, nothing, you deal with people's money, you have to have your files have to be exact and so forth, and you have to be very, very well organised. Now, we'll skip some years. Some say he came back in 1914, others say 1915. But what is known is that he was involved in the 1916 Easter Rising. Now, he wasn't one of the top leaders in that, but he was housed right there at the GPO, the headquarters of the rebel soldiers of the 1916 Easter Rising. Now, obviously, there was a 6-day war for any of you guys who are not Irish, a 6-day war. Every war we had against Britain we lost, including this one as well. We had to surrender on the 6th day. It started on Easter Monday, 1916, and it ended the following Saturday, 6 days later. Now, legend has it that all the leaders of the 1916 Easter Rising are in the courtyard of the prison. And they're over here on the right-hand side. And amongst them is Collins. And just a couple of feet away are all the soldiers in the courtyard of the prison. Because they're all arrested, right? And legend has it that Collins overhears one of the British military officers saying, and those on the right are going to be executed. And he moves over here. And all of these guys are executed. Except for one. One guy wasn't. One of these leaders was not executed. Anyone know why this one person would not be executed?
Because he was American.
What?
Because he was American.
No, Pierce was executed.
Oh, De Valera.
It's De Valera. Very good film. And why was he not executed?
Because he was American, wasn't he?
Because he was born in America. The British didn't want to mess with the Americans. He was born in America, De Valera, and because of this, he wasn't executed along with the rest of the leaders. Now, he was only an infant when his mother brought him to Ireland, his Irish mother. So he wasn't even a year old when he came back to Ireland. So when he was brought to Ireland, and amazingly, this guy, De Valera, that could have died, or could have been executed along with his friends and so forth in the 1916 after the 1916 Easter Rising, went on to live. He was 94 years old. He's probably only about 27, 28 years old then, right? He also ended up being the Taoiseach. For all you guys who are not Irish, Taoiseach means leader in the Irish language, or Prime Minister in this case. For 36 years he was Prime Minister, at different intervals. And for 14 years, 2 terms, he was the President of Ireland. So for 50 years, he was either Taoiseach, Prime Minister, or President of Ireland. And he could have been executed that day. So God bless America. If he wasn't born there, that could have happened, right? Now, anyway, the British executed these guys, and there's uproar across the world for executing these guys because they were not terrorists, they were freedom fighters. Especially the Americans are outraged by this. And all of these guys are given a life sentence to soldiers. Now that was commuted to 7 months. They're out after the end of the year in 1916 because of the world uproar. But the big mistake the British made was they put all these guys into the same prison, a place called Frongoch in Wales. But the bigger mistake they made was, amongst these soldiers was this man, Michael Collins, this great leader. So what does Collins do as soon as he gets to the prison? He starts putting together a team together of the best sharpshooters, the best soldiers amongst them. And he even gives them a name, calls them the Squad. Now they get out after 7 months, and as soon as they get out, they go on the rampage and they start shooting, not regular British soldiers. They went after, Collins wanted to go after the big brass, the top British officials, informers and what have you. And he did it with huge success, so much success that the British Prime Minister Lloyd George puts a 10,000 bounty on his head, dead or alive, thinking that 10,000 back in that time would have been a huge amount of money, right? Thinking that everybody would inform him. No, such the respect people had for Collins, nobody would inform on it. Nobody would give him up. In fact, Collins had intel on all the British officials, the top brass. Why? Where do you get this information from? From young ladies that worked as maids and what have you in these large homes around Dublin, these squares and so forth. They'd be pouring a cup of tea, and here Wigan, pouring a cup of coffee for breakfast, wherever the case may be, and they're listening to what's been said and so forth. So Collins knew exactly where they lived, what they ate for breakfast, what time they had tea, the whole lot, right? So he had all this intel on these guys, and they had none on him because he was also a master of disguise. So it's believed that he would cycle past British officials, British soldiers, and give them a wave and so forth. He'd have a moustache on or whatever, and hair, long hair, whatever the case, he'd be in disguise. So they couldn't find him, and also he never stayed in the one house more than one night. So he lived in all different places throughout the city, even the suburbs of Dublin, and he'd never be in the same place more than one night. Now, I'm going to skip some years, but a big event happened in November the 21st, 1920. I'm sure you all guys have heard of Bloody Sunday, right? Which happened in Derry in 1972. Well, the original Bloody Sunday was this one, November 21st, 1920. And what happened that day, Collins had all of his men, members of this squad, as he called them, right? All these sharpshooters. And at 9 a.m. that morning, he had them all at these officials' houses, of the British officials' houses, the big brass and what have you. And he shot them all. Most of them were killed, some of them got away, but the majority of them were killed, right? This is at 9 a.m. In retaliation, the British supposedly said that they got intel that Collins was at a match in Croke Park that afternoon between Tipperary versus Dublin, again, a football match. And the British soldiers come in and started opening fire, started shooting into the stands. They killed 14 people, 4 of them under the age of 18, one was a 10-year-old boy. They also killed one of the Tipperary footballers, a guy by the name of Michael Hogan. Now, Croke Park is Ireland's national stadium. It's the largest stadium in Ireland, and the largest stand there is named after this young 21-year-old Michael Hogan, called the Hogan Stand. There's even a pub outside called the Hogan Stand, named after this one. So, you know, once again, Collins is outraged because Collins wasn't there at all. So, that was their excuse for going in there in retaliation for what happened earlier that morning. So, once again, Collins goes on a rampage. They realise they can't defeat this man. They put a bounty on his head, nobody would give him up, nobody would warn him. He's using guerrilla warfare. We can't catch him. He's taken out too many of our big shots and so forth in the military. They have to negotiate. Now, at the time, the leader of Ireland at this time would have been, unofficial leader, if you like, would have been Eamon de Valera. And by rights, he should have gone over to London to negotiate a treaty with the British. But he sent Collins over. Collins was reluctant to go over, but he went over anyway. And there was an ultimatum put before Collins, and it was that we will give you the 26 counties of Southern Ireland, but we're holding on to the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, because there was a lot of British influence, a lot of British settlers in Northern Ireland at this time. So Collins thought about it for a while, but he wasn't given any time to think too hard about it. But he decided to sign it, and his way of thinking was freedom now for more freedom later. That we'll get this 26 counties of Southern Ireland and we'll fight for your 6 counties at a later time. But when he got back, and he knew this was going to happen, he knew he was signing his own death warrant when he signed this. Because when he got back to Dublin, half the country was so excited that now we have 26 counties to rule on our own and so forth, and the other half of the country was devastated because they wanted the 32 counties. But that's not what was on the table. So a civil war breaks out, anti-treaty, pro-treaty. You had brother versus brother. You had father against son. And it went on for probably over a year or so for this war. And during this war, Michael Collins was shot dead at the age of 31. He happened to go down to his family area where he grew up in Cork, a place called Plain LeBlanc, and he was shot by a sniper in the laptop, and he was killed instantly. He was brought back here to Glasnevin Cemetery. Now, Glasnevin Cemetery has got nearly 2 million, I think it's 1.75 million people buried there, by far and away Ireland's largest cemetery.
Turn off, it's good enough. It's good enough.